what else is going on here? We are busy just sort of watching the world try and you can feel like the whole world's trying to push this square peg into a round hole, and it's trying to like put masks and vaccines back in and talking about them as if they can somehow get us all to comply like we did before, which was so much fun for them. But just insane, Kathy Hochul, the truly insane, if not um, demonic governor of New York, came out just today, and said, "Oh, if you've had vaccines, none of them count. They don't count. You're unvaccinated. You're going to need to get vaccinated." Right. So just wipe the slate clean. You got to start fresh with the new vaccines that both Moderna and Pfizer have run. And by the way, the same thing. They just ran them into a few mice, right? And like literally 50 people for like 2 weeks.
Was this the one that they were asking for volunteers for? They
Oh,
were
no, that's
like,
a different one. Pfizer wants some volunteers.
anybody unvaccinated that we might be able to track a little bit? It was so awkward.
I know. No, this is the 50 people for the Moderna trial, 2 weeks, and that's it. And they didn't where, your myocarditis showed up at 2 weeks in a day. Who knows, right? But even despite that, these are for variants that no longer are circulating. So they're already out of date. But to get up to date, you're going to have to take one of these boosters, which is already out of date. That's the logic world we live in. But this is the world of inversion where literally these people, the Kathy Hochul's, she'll be representative of these people for now, are operating in a way which is so devoid of logic. You can't make it make sense, right? You can't do that. And maybe that's the point. Matthias Desmet tells us the point of the things they ask you to believe in a mass formation is that the more illogical and irrational they are, the more power they have. So this vaccine and mask orthodoxy has such power that there are parents, again, masking up elementary school children. They're doing this in Maryland now. We have people saying you have to get these boosters, even though they boost for something that's already out of date. It doesn't matter because the old boosters didn't work, because we have the Cleveland Clinic data, which showed that the more boosters you had, the more you caught COVID, right? There's a perfect dose response. 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was like the best chart ever, right? Jim H knows what I'm talking about. So with that, let's go right to questions, because that's what we're doing today.
All right, let's do it. While I'm finding that, did people how are people complying with that? What's your sense of like how the world's reacting to that BS?
Oh, I think it's going to be very poor. They haven't tried to force the compliance yet, but I've seen a lot of people saying I'm just not doing it.
No, thank you,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's nuts. All right, let me see here. Where are we? Okay. This is around COVID variants. Might as well start talking right about that. Jump in here. COVID variants, evolutionary or lab created. And I think it was R. Miller or at Backtorm said, Chris was very early to the point out, the problem that Omicron took a very different path from evolution. It looked radically unlike the other strains and could have been another release. Intentional ? We have recently learned that there may be many strains that were also not evolutionary. I presume you are familiar with Geert Vanden Bossche, and whose theory leans heavily on the evolutionary model. Have you been able to tease these competing ideas apart?
Okay. So look, Omicron is so different that I actually postulated in a piece I wrote recently that we had SARS Classic, which I believe also now was a lab creation. We had MERS, which I also believe was a lab creation. Then we had SARS-2. I might also put Omicron as like SARS-3. It's so different. It's just that different, right? It's again a chimera. It's got a piece from the original spike protein, which we have to date to April 2020. That's where it was last seen in the wild. Then it has a whole bunch of new things. So whoever's doing this is doing this in a lab. Now, I can't tell you if that was a white hat or a black hat operation. White hat, somebody said, this ends the pandemic, which it did. Omicron came out. I was really worried about the first R naughts. I was like, uh-oh, this is the measles. 2 weeks into this thing, I'm watching South African hospital data like a hawk, and nothing's happening. In fact, the South African hospital data is getting better. And I'm like, it's all over. So it was 3 weeks after Omicron came out. My piece was titled COVID is over, right? Okay. I'm a little fast to the game, but It should have been, right? So here we are still sort of battling with this. And so these new variants are actually, many of them are progeny of the original Omicron strain. We can track the lineage. We know where they came from. And there are more and more and more mutations, but the way these mutations are unfolding is not like Geert. Geert has been saying these mutations are going to eventually overwhelm the host body and it's going to be very bad. He might still be true, but those apocryphal thoughts have not yet come due. In fact, we've seen the opposite, which is these new variations are coming along and they seem to be more and more and more like a cold, the common cold.
So part of what he said has come true in that the vaccines and what they're doing to people's immune systems is totally
that's true.
Making a hot mess of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So the more people get vaccinated, the more likely they are to take their immune system and dysregulate it, either through IgG4 subclass class switching of the antibodies. So you're now producing antibodies, which are telling your body, in effect, don't worry about this thing. Don't fight it. That's great if it's pollen. Not so great if it's a replicating virus. So that's bad news, right? So that's part of the deal. And the more people get vaccinated, the more likely they are to dysregulate their immune system against this virus. But then, of course, other things, and nothing's been resolved. We don't know if it's the NLP, the little nanolipid particle thing. We don't know if it's the spike protein that's coded for by this particular thing. And it's a point I've been making for a long time. The spike protein that you get out of the mRNA is not the same thing as the spike protein you get off of a wild type virus. First, it's not the same sequence. Second, it's been made in a completely different pathway, so it might be folded completely differently, which gives it completely different biological activity. They've never characterized the biological activity of a fully expressed spike protein through their mRNA system. That would have been great because it doesn't come in the normal pathway. It doesn't get folded, so it doesn't have the right shape. Might be all like weird shaped. But I can tell you this because this wasn't under Chatham House rules. So when I was at the Brownstone thing, I was sitting next to Joe Verone, and he's on the FLCCC as well. So I was there talking about that, and he was really good friends with, like, first name basis, like even beyond that, with Luc Montaigne, right? So he is the Nobel Prize winner for the HIV work, one of the world's preeminent virologists. Unfortunately, has passed on recently. But when Luc accepted his Nobel Prize, he was allowed to invite two people, and he invited Joe and his wife. So that's how close he was. Okay, like they're really close. So within hours of Luc Montaigne getting this code and running it through his system, he called Joe up and said, "This thing has 4 HIV inserts in it. There's not a chance that this could have come from any other path." And Joe said, "What do I do with that information?" He said, "Watch for CD4 counts relative to CD8 counts." Like early on, this was like within a week of getting notified. And said, "This thing, somebody engineered this, and they've engineered it in a way that it's going to get into your white blood cells. It's going to mess the counts up." And of course, that is part of the pathology that we're seeing now. So back to the vaccine. We now know that some of them get the vaccine, and a year later, they're still producing spike protein. So some cells have taken that junk up and are cranking out these spike proteins, again with the quotes. And if they're misfolded and they happen to have their HIV portions exposed, these people are going to be immune dysregulated. Their CD4 counts are going to be off. They're not going to be able to fight cancer, their lupus, autoimmune diseases. All these things we would predict would be a function of a dysregulated CD4 versus CD8 ratio. And that's what we've been seeing. So for these people, fast forward, to come forward and say, and I couldn't believe it, the CDC, we want everybody from 6 months of age on up to get vaccinated. It's painful at this point how inhumane this is. It's that's why, at Honey Badger, I want to have a really good private conversation with people. Put their cell phones in the Faraday cage, like take the batteries out, whatever we have to do. Because I want to talk about like that this has now gotten to religious. There's a religious war coming, is the way I look at it, because there's this fanaticism. There's no other way to describe vaccinating a 6-month-old child with this toxic crap.
Is that the trivalent thing they're trying to get into people?
Oh, is that the one where they're putting the flu plus the this? Plus?
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, none of them actually work for the circulating whatevers, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
No. So. I think what you're talking about is.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, he didn't get the memo about not taking the vaccine. I was trying so hard to, pass along the information I could about the work that Chris was onto at that point. But at any rate, he's a couple years younger than I, and he got like, what did he say, 5 shots?
Yeah.
He's had COVID, I think he said 6 times.
And he's just been otherwise sick the whole time.
Oh, he's just miserable. He's got POTS, so he has that, like they put him on a heart medication because he was tachycardic, but he's like,
this guy was busting 180 beats per minute just standing up from a squatting position.
I'm worried about him, but
wait, tell people what else happened to your poor brother.
Which part?
So all right, so he was regaling all of this, and so Evie, of course, in her kind older sisterly way, said, "Hey, I'm gonna put this fridge magnet on you."
I did. Well, I just had to.
So it's all kind of like, haha, maybe this was a bad thing, but when the fridge magnet sticks,
oh, he freaked out. He totally freaked out.